Okay, boys and girls. Whoa! Let's continue our talk about Mendel and Mendel's work. Now, as you see, table here that I've taken from another textbook, borrowed from another textbook. It shows the different characters that Mendel studied. He kept track of. He counted. Flower color, flower position, seed color, seed shape, pod color, and so on. During his experiments, he noticed that for every character there were two traits: purple, white, yellow, green, round, wrinkled. He noticed that there was a predominant trait, purple over white, and he called this the dominant trait. His second concept, that all characters are going to have at least two traits, and one of these traits is going to be, from each of the parents. And of those two traits, one will be dominant in that it will have a greater influence on what trait is visible, the physical, the phenotype. Keep in mind, dominant recessive. Many students want to seem to think that the dominant, somehow overrules the recessive. The dominant subverses or covers up the recessive. Keep in mind, these are just two parts of strands of DNA. They have absolutely no physical contact with each other, no physical interaction. As we saw in the last lecture, the dominant allele, the dominant gene, the dominant trait actually codes for a protein that makes a working enzyme. The recessive generally is going to be for, a non-functioning protein, which means it's a non-functioning enzyme. From here on out, over the next, actually from here to the end of the semester, when we're talking genetics, we have to keep two things in mind. First, the phenotype. Pheno means physical. The physical type. Purple versus white, green versus yellow. What we physically see. And the second thing is genotype. What genes are present? So, we see that Mendel's concepts, the third one, which talked about last lecture, talked about just the last slide, that two alleles, what we now call alleles, he called traits. One dominant trait, one dominant allele for modern science, will determine the phenotype. Okay? The one that we call the recessive will either have no function, or its functioning will be masked by the overriding function of the dominant allele. And his fourth concept, what he called the law of segregation. Now, segregation, we know this means separating, keeping things separate. Here, his law of segregation talked about how an organism, when it goes to produce its gametes, sperm, egg, pollen, whatever, ovum, that every gamete will only get one copy of every trait. Okay, got to remember, this is Mendel back in the mid 1800s. Still don't know DNA, still don't know chromosomes, all of that. So he was saying that in the gamete, all gametes get only one copy, one trait for every characteristic, every character. Which nowadays, modern science, you think back to chapter 11 in meiosis, we know that every gamete that's produced is haploid, thus it only gets one set of chromosomes. Every chromosome is going to have only one gene, allele. So, turns out he was right.